Right, all packed and ready to go on my 3-day safari of Wales. No real plan of where I'm going to go, but I'm going to pick some of the quietest roads I can and just see how far I can get in about a day and a half, camp in the back of the Land Rover and then come back home. So now for the expensive bit, filling up with petrol, and of course it was designed for 4-star fuel, but we can put a little bit of fuel additive in and drive it carefully so we don't do any damage to the engine. Of course, the unusual thing about the old Land Rover is you actually sit on the fuel tank and there's not a lot of protection between you and a great big tub of fuel. So one of the great joys of driving a Series 1 around is the speed you're forced to go at. It doesn't go much more than about 45 miles an hour on the main roads, which means you take time to look at things and stuff you might have missed when you were driving around sealed up in a modern car. So off the main road and onto the quieter roads, which is why I planned this in the first place. There's one thing I've really noticed is that we seem to be a country now of A and B roads, and these little roads seem to be being completely forgotten, getting thrown around all over the place, and it's not just the fault of the Land Rover, but the roads are in a pretty poor state. Well, we've climbed up a bit now and I'm beginning to get the stunning views of this little bit of Wales. I've lived here nearly all my life on and off, and yet travelling at this pace you realise just how much you've missed and how much of the countryside you really didn't know. So I'm glad I'm getting a second look at it in slow time. Another pleasure of the Land Rover is you're quite high up, so even with these sort of high hedges you can still get quite a good view, and something you wouldn't see at all sitting in a low down car. Stopped for a bit of lunch just above Pont Robert. It's 1 o'clock now, so time to have a bit of a break from the bouncy road and the noise of the Land Rover. I thought I'd talk a bit today about why I'm doing this trip, and maybe tomorrow a bit more about the Land Rover itself, because it is a bit unusual as Series 1s go. It's just incredible. I mean, it's mid-July 2018 and we have just had unbelievable weather for days on end, so I thought too good an opportunity to miss to take the Land Rover out for a little bit of a trip around Wales and actually camp inside it, because the chance of getting cold or soaking wet is probably nil, and I've never known a time when it's been like that here. It's true also that my partner Steph's having a baby, so a few people could say I'm going on one last sort of fling on my own, but it's more a case of just the weather being wonderful and the vehicle being available and being on holiday, and just thinking I've got to make the most of it. So I'll try and do 3 days. Don't know how far I'll get, but that's not really the point. It's just really to slow down a bit. One of the things that's really got me recently is just the pace of life, the amount of emails and Facebook and yes, making videos and things like that. And so what I really wanted to do was to get away from the computer and all that fast pace and just slow down a bit and enjoy the countryside and the fresh air. And I thought this was an absolutely excellent way to do it. So 3 days of this is going to be great fun. Getting a bit warm inside, so time to turn the air conditioning on. There we go, that should make things a bit cooler. Certainly found some really quiet roads around Dalanag. You get the impression that no one's ever been down them, they're so quiet. The only vehicle I've met so far is the postwoman delivering mail, but other than that, there's been absolutely nobody about. But great views nonetheless. Found a lovely place just to rest for a while. This is the River Banway. Not much water in it at the moment, but good place to find a bit of shade, and I was going to let the Land Rover cool down a little bit because it was running a bit hot. So I'm up near Dolwyn at the moment. I really wanted to come back here because a few years ago Steph and I did a bit of a challenge. We decided we'd walk across Wales, sort of not really coast to coast, but from at least a line joining up the coast to the English border. And this is one of the lovely places we came through on the Glendower Way. So I can see the signpost behind us, and that reminds me of the walk that we did. It was great fun, and it was near here that we stopped by the river and had lunch, which was lovely. This was our river stop on our walk across Wales a few years ago. It was a lovely spot. We had our lunch and just sort of rested for a while. But I'm actually going in the Land Rover the other way now, so I'm sort of driving into Wales, and we were actually walking on our way back to Welshpool and then to the English border. Land Rover seems to be going well, even though it's very hot, so that's good news. So a few more hours before we find somewhere to stop for tea. So the big mountain's coming into sight, and here's Cadair Idris. Found a nice place to stop in the foothills of Cadair Idris. So it's 5 o'clock and I think it's about time to get a brew on and have a cup of tea. Fabulous spot I've found here, so I think I actually might make this base camp for tonight because I'm quite tired, done quite a lot of driving, and it's such a lovely spot that once I made a cup of tea I really didn't want to move on. I'm sitting here reading a bit of Mary Webb, which I know is Shropshire, but yeah, it's still about the Marches, an area not so far away from here, so I suppose it's fairly relevant. But I think we'll stop here for the night, make some supper a bit later on, and see what the morning brings. Time for another brew, and one of the tricks that most good campers know is to put the water that you're going to boil into your mug, put in just a little bit too much, and then you're not wasting any, and you've got a tiny bit of boiling water then to clean your mug with, which is great. So time for another cup of tea. The rooks peered down at him over their nests, and when he'd done there was a sudden clatter of wings, and they all swept into the blue sky with a great clary, as if they were considering what he said. In a while they came back and settled down, very serious and quiet, so he knew they'd meant to bide. Well, I've been here for quite a few hours now, and the only traffic we've had was a man walking his dog and 2 sheep. There hasn't been a single vehicle past. So I'm really glad I found such a quiet spot. It's lovely, and we'll definitely spend the night here. So time for a bit of supper. I think I'm going to be a bit lazy and just do boil in the bag tonight. Though Steph will be impressed because it's a vegetarian one. What have we got? Yeah, vegetarian pasta, best before the end of 2017, so it's mid-2018 now. So that should be absolutely fine. And we can have a hot drink afterwards once the water's boiled. Obviously being pretty careful with the cooking at the moment because it's so incredibly dry everywhere. So I've got my little gas cooker and I've got it up on the metal tailgate of the Land Rover, so it's safe enough. There's absolutely no building fires on the ground at the moment, even if you're allowed to, because it would be just such a risk in this hot, dry weather. One thing I find really useful is one of these divers type watches. It has one of those rotating bezels on it, and it's really useful if you're cooking just to set it so you know how many minutes it's been boiling for. So I just set it so I know I've got about 10 minutes, so I don't have to worry about when to switch off the cooker and know my food's ready. Don't know how this huge boulder got here, maybe left over from the Ice Age, but makes a convenient seat anyway. It's that lovely evening light now as the sun goes down behind the trees. So I'm going to get down back to the Land Rover and maybe start to get bedding put out. I'm ready to sleep tonight, and really looking forward to what tomorrow's going to bring, because it's actually gone really well today. Been a lovely warm day and it's still a very warm evening. Time to get bed sorted. So I've got a really nice sleeping area sorted out, and one thing I really can't live without, and I have it in my tent all the time, is what I call a spaceship. It's one of these lights, and I'm just going to hang it from the roof, and it's really useful because you've always got light when you need it. And there we go. Well, it's just gone 10 o'clock and it's time for bed. Had a fantastic day. It's still quite warm outside, so I think just a thin sleeping bag will do the trick. Anyway, looking forward to a bit of sleep and a bit of rest, and I'll see you tomorrow morning. So I was up bright and early this morning and had to go and get some oil for the Land Rover, the usual little niggles, but all seems to be fine now, misfiring a little bit. Anyway, yesterday I said why I was doing this trip to try and sort of get away from the internet and chill out a bit. And what I'll do today is talk a little bit more about the Land Rover, because it's slightly unusual for a Series 1. So anyone who knows their Land Rovers will definitely recognise this as a Series 1. It's quite a late one actually, it's 1958. So it's one of the last ones that were made, but it's had very few owners in its time, and I've had it for, well, I think at least 20 years, if not more, and really enjoyed it, but it hasn't had a lot of use for the past 2 years, so it's been time to give it a little bit of a run. So a little bit of history of the vehicle. As I said, I've had it for 20, maybe 25 years, and what I actually wanted was a Series 1 right from the early days, and I ended up buying a Willys Jeep thanks to my brother who kindly found me one. And then this was available, so I couldn't resist but to make an offer, and I paid £600 for it. It's got a really interesting history. In fact, it wasn't registered in 1958 when it was manufactured, but in the early 60s, and it had been in the RAF for a while, and I believe it had been on airfields towing munitions. On the front there are some red sort of flashes, and I suppose those were to indicate that it was carrying explosives. Well, it came out of the RAF, and it's still got the indication inside of the military number plates it used to have, and it was bought by a lady who had it for years and years and years, and was an archaeologist at Manchester University. And I'm told it's been on digs all over the place. I think it's been to Turkey and back at least twice, which must have been an incredible expedition. Looking at the Marlowe Meter, it's nearly about to go round again to 000, and I think it's already been round at least once, if not twice. But it's still running okay. She had it for years and years and years, and then when she stopped working at the university, she gave it to the professor of archaeology there, and he used it, though it was actually registered to the university. So when he didn't really have a use for it and had it at home and it was just sitting there, I made him an offer and it became mine. So I think it's really only had about 2 or 3 owners before I had it. Luckily I keep it in the garage so it's not too rusty, and it's been absolutely great fun, and in this weather it's been well worth taking out. We're just in the foothills of Carcaradoc at the moment. Well, I mentioned that this Series 1 is somewhat unusual, and it's not just the fact that it's very original and most of the bits are, on it are totally original to the vehicle when it was built. It's had hardly anything changed on it. But what's particularly unusual, and you can't tell just by looking at it from the outside, is it's a 2-wheel drive Series 1, which, to be honest with you, is utterly useless for going off-road, but a lot of fun for driving on the roads because it's incredibly light. The steering is so light because the front wheels aren't driven at all. And I'm told they made about 600 of them, but I'm not sure if that's true, for the RAF for towing munitions. Why they ever built a special one that was 2-wheel drive I shall never know, and I bet they got them stuck many a time. It's pretty original, and the seats have absolutely had it. They're falling apart, but that's sort of what you'd expect of a vehicle of this age. And no seat belts, of course, so you have to be a bit careful, but then you're never going to go much faster than about 40 miles an hour. And then there's the proof that it's only two-wheel drive. And I reckon that plate you can see in the middle of the photograph that blanks the two- and four-wheel drive lever must be one of the rarest things in Land Rover parts available. Because why did they bother doing that? Why actually make a special one? Why not just have the Land Rover as it was? And that plate on top that's used for filling the gearbox oil, on a cold day it's a good idea to open that up, and you get a good breeze from the warm engine. It's the only way to heat the vehicle because it never had a heater fitted, though there are some holes that someone else made to try and fit one, and it's so smelly with the oil I've shoved a rag in it. But as you can see, it's about as original as you can get, and still in fairly good shape. So there you have it, two-wheel drive Series 1 from 1958, XRAF, and a whole lot of fun. The weather's kept up, so I'm going to carry on. I'm trying to find the most minor roads I can, working my way back east now from Towin, and maximum speed seems to be about 35 miles an hour, but it's well worth it because the weather's lovely and the views are absolutely fantastic. Well, the trip's certainly doing what I wanted it to do. I'm taking the minor roads and really chilling out. De-stressed from work. The trouble is the Land Rover always gives you a few little niggles. I was running out of oil earlier today, so I managed to sort that, and it's misfiring slightly, but taking it slowly and seems to be getting there. And then I found the ignition switch seems to be falling apart, so pretty important that that works. But you kind of just get on, and I found a lovely spot, so I'm just going to rest a little bit here and then we'll go on a little bit later. Nice spot by the river, so time for a brew and a bit of a rest from all that driving. It's at this stage in the proceedings that Bear Grylls would need to get naked. I can assure you that's not going to happen now. I mentioned the lady archaeologist who owned it for a very long time and took it on her digs all over the world. Well, that probably explains the metal and very ancient Girl Guides badge on the front. Certainly been there for a very long time. A couple of other things speak of its military pedigree, apart from the red flash on the back, which I think was to indicate that it was carrying explosives. On the other side you can see an old trailer connector, and that's the old military one, not the one they use now, multi-pin connector, and just to the left of it is a sort of block with a screw thread on it, so you can unscrew the cap from the connector and screw the cap onto there so you don't lose it, which is quite clever. Parked up just for a few minutes and thought I'd take a walk up to the castle just above the car park. and absolutely spectacular views of the valley below, so it's well worth stopping here. One of the many joys of having a vehicle like this, I find, is the people you meet. I've only been out for, what is it, a day and a half, nearly 2 days now, and the number of people who stop and chat and say, can I take a photograph of the vehicle, or I've got one of those, or some of the farmers I've met who said, oh, we used to have one on the farm, and you know, they looked at the tyres and said, oh yeah, those Avon tyres, you can't get anything like that now, they were the best. I reckon, I've always said this, you can buy a Ferrari and you can park this next to it, and the same with my Willis Jeep, and the kids will always, and most adults as well, will just want to climb all over this and play with this. It's the best £600 I've ever spent, and you know, not only a lifestyle choice, but a really nice way to sort of meet people on your travels and just get talking. Rather nice spot by the lake, so time for a bit of lunch now, I think. Well, we've had a little bit of an electrical issue. I knew that starter on-off switch was a little bit duff, and it's finally failed, so I've shorted out the terminals, and I think the best thing to do now is to slowly but surely head for home. Let's see how we get on. All part of Land Rovering. So, after a little bit of a technical problem when we stopped for petrol, I think the on-off switch has completely fallen apart internally, and typically it's failed off. So I've managed to sort of rig it so the vehicle still keeps going. But as you can probably hear, it's been misfiring quite a bit today. So I'm going to cut the journey just a little bit short and work my way back home slowly. But the joy of these vehicles is you can usually just keep them running enough to get you back, and so that's what I'm doing. But still good fun. I'm just taking roads that are a little bit quicker and a little less steep, because I haven't got the power in the engine anymore. But these things happen, and I'm sure we can sort it out and take the Land Rover out again another time. So, a few more things to show you that we haven't seen on the vehicle yet, and one of them is the engine. When you lift the bonnet, it's quite amusing if you ever do it with the tyre, the spare wheel, not on top, and you forget, it sort of flies open because it's incredibly light. It's the whole weight of it is just the spare tyre on top. But let's have a look at the engine. So this one's got its original engine, and it's the 2-litre petrol engine, and I believe it was the one they put in the Rover car, I'm told. What I particularly like about it is that you need a spanner to actually take the breather off to put oil in, which is rather unusual for a car. And you've got to remember, of course, that everything on this is AF, so it's Imperial, but you need a special set of spanners to actually take anything apart. So I keep those everywhere we go. Now here's a feature I particularly like, and I wish my V8 Discovery had this. Under the seat, that's the passenger seat, is this great big huge cubby hole for storing bits and pieces, and I've got it sort of full of spares, and of course that AF spanner set that you always need with the Series 1. Many people would say you need a set of tools wherever you go, but in fact they don't get used very much. It's just the odd spanner and screwdriver that I need. And as with today, you can usually fix most things on the road fairly simply. But it's a very useful storage space, and unfortunately I spilt some oil in it a while ago, so I don't put much else in there because it's so oily. But it's extremely useful for keeping all the kit in, and the tools, they just stay in there for good. They stay with the vehicle all the time. So we're almost home now. In fact, we're so close that if anything else breaks or fails, I think I can probably roll all the way home. That's to say, apart from the brakes, if they fail, I think I'm going to overshoot by a very long way. But managed to limp home with the misfire, and I think with a bit of a repair, won't be any problem at all. She'll be running again before too long. One of the things I really notice is a big difference between the V8 Disco and the Series 1, and that's its turning circle. The Discovery has an absolutely dreadful turning circle, whereas the Series 1 can turn on a sixpence, and you can see it whiz round the bales without any problem at all. Well, that was a great fun trip. I know the Land Rover let me down a little bit, but nothing we couldn't sort to get us home, which in fact for me is one of the fun bits of having one of these, just to see how long you can survive. I do have an AA membership, but I take great pride in never using it and seeing if I can fix the vehicle on the road. Still, seen lots of really interesting places, chatted and met loads of fun people en route, so it's been really well worth doing, and I've returned back home in one piece and without a drop of rain, so that's been worth it.